everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of When I Grow Up. On today's episode, I have a new friend here with me. Her name is Jessie Lian, and she is a UX/UI designer. I hope I said that right. I'm going to be honest, I know nothing about this field, but I'm excited to have her on. I'm excited to have another creative to talk to today. Hey, Jessie, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Happy to be here.
Thank you again so much for being with me today. Let's just jump right in. What is a UX/UI designer?
Yeah, so a UX designer, it stands for user experience, and it is basically the person who designs like the mobile app before it gets into development, or who designs like a digital product or like the experience of a website. So like anything digital before it's developed, someone is out there figuring out like where does the button go, what kind of features should be in this product, like what makes the most sense for like how a user might like navigate through the entire digital experience. And that's basically what a user experience designer does. And so there's a lot of different phases within the user experience process. So it's very research driven because the whole point of user experience design is creating products and experiences that are useful to the end user and intuitive to the end user and like delightful to the end user. So we always start off with a lot of research where we like basically go out to the target audience or the end user and we ask them questions like we kind of okay, so I guess there's a lot of different ways to do research, but okay, so like let's say I'm part of a company and we're trying to, this is actually my current project actually, so I'll just talk
Oh,
about that.
perfect. That's great.
Yeah. So like my client right now is a hospital, and our just blanket question right now is how can we make the lives of a nurse manager better with digital products? So we are interviewing a lot of nurse managers. Ideally, in a non-COVID world, we'd be shadowing them, but like we're having them do like a virtual diary where they just like log their day every day and we're like kind of spying on them. So we kind of like see what their like day to day is, and then based off of that we begin to like ideate different digital products that like might solve their problems. And then from there once we like figure out what the right kind of product is, we will like do more research to figure out what the right features are, and there's just a lot of like research involved just to make sure that what we're creating and designing is actually useful, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. Wow, that's incredible. Um, so I had no idea I knew like, people had to develop the product and things like that, but I had no idea there was an actual
Mhm.
person that would have to think about the best way to make the experience for somebody I guess even like pleasant, right? Like efficient and pleasant
Yeah.
and like
Yes.
appealing. That's crazy. Okay. I
Yes,
find your current
exactly.
project extremely fascinating because my mind doesn't even go to like, companies like needing that type of research to make things for them. My mind goes just like to like apps, those kinds of things like that.
Yes. Yeah. No, for sure, and I think maybe I'm in a more non-traditional UX job, but, like, you know, big ticket place Spotify has a bunch of UX designers, and that's why their experience when you use that app is really good, and, like, Airbnb, Facebook, Instagram, like, all of those big tech, like, companies and products, they all have a lot of UX designers, and it's interesting, and, like, even okay, so, like, the idea of the endless scroll on Instagram was a
Yes.
UX decision because they knew like that it's more addictive, I guess, if it's like an endless scroll instead of it being like a swipe or something. Like so even just like those sorts of decisions, a UX designer is behind it. Like, is it gonna be endless scroll? Is it gonna be a carousel? Where's the button gonna be? So
My
yeah,
face is
I
like
go
just
see.
shocked right now because it's like, yes, like of course you have to think of those things. Like
Right,
someone is
right.
literally like I don't, oh, that's crazy. I don't even know how to articulate it, but that's crazy.
Yeah. There's so much thinking behind the smallest decision. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. Even like what color should the button be? And that goes more into like UI design, which is what you asked about. And UI design is more so like the actual aesthetic of the screen. There's still like psychology behind it, but it's not as like research focused, I guess. It's just more on the aesthetic side.
Yeah, you mentioned the word psychology. Yeah, there's a ton of psychology behind this whole career, I feel like, because you have to
Yeah.
think about what people like and how their minds work. Man, that's
Mm-hmm.
crazy. Okay, so I
Mm-hmm.
mean this must be a fairly new like career path, no?
Yeah, definitely. I don't quote me on this, even though I know I'm being recorded, but I feel like it's only like a 10, maybe 20, but like a 10-year-old job title.
Yeah,
Like
it
it's super
seems
fresh.
seems like
Yeah.
something that, I when I was about to start college, like wouldn't even exist really. But is there a major
Right.
for this? Like, is this like a studying thing?
Yeah. So I don't know about undergrad, at least like not as of today in 2020. I don't know about undergrad, but like there's grad school programs for human computer interactions. And a lot of people who study human computer interaction end up as UX designers or product designers.
I
So,
see. So
yeah.
did you go to school for this?
I did not go to school. Oh, I went to a boot camp, and that's how a lot of people in the UX field are UX designers, is there's a lot of people that went through boot camp and
Oh,
changed their career.
interesting. Okay, so I'll get into that in a little bit, but before I do, I want to ask you, so these days, are you working from home?
Yep.
Okay, so with COVID and everything, you're working from home, but if you weren't working from home, what would a typical day look like for you?
Yeah. It varies. Classic answer, but it depends on where we are in the design process. So, like, if we're in the research process, then my typical day would look like me interviewing the user or like coming up with like interview guides or maybe shadowing, kind of like going out in the field and doing research like that. If we're past that phase, then I'm doing a lot of synthesis and I'm just trying to like, you collect all this data, so you have to like analyze it to
Mhm.
some degree. Sometimes that comes from surveys. Sometimes it's more just like qualitative data from like interviews. So I'll kind of like parse it out. And then if we're past that phase and we're in like the concept phase, then I'll be just like brainstorming different like solutions and ideas. I'll be like wireframing things out in like online tools and then if we pass that phase then I'll be like testing the ideas with the users and sort of doing some prototyping with them and just kind of like iterating and iterating until the end product is solid.
Okay, so you may have mentioned it and I might have missed it. I apologize, but with all this research and like doing coming up with what's going to be best for the user, are you actually doing like
Hmm.
the coding for the product itself too?
Mm-mm. No, no, and that's like a distinction that like it's not like a required skill for a UX designer, I guess, because there's so much else that goes into the job that usually in a company the UX designer is doing their thing and they'll like kind of mock up like a blueprint almost of like what the product should look like the screens and like the flows, and there's like all sorts of prototyping tools where you can basically like mock create like a mock version of the app without actually developing a single thing. And that's perfect because you can test that with users and they can like pretend like they're actually going through the real experience. But then there's like no like lift from a development standpoint. And then once we like solidify the concepts or the idea, then we'll like kind of hand it off to a developer who will actually code it.
That
And
is
it's
so
great
cool.
because like they have a blueprint. Yeah, yeah. It's actually really cool. And it saves so much time for the developer because, like they're getting something they know has been validated instead of like putting something out in the market and then it failing and then they have to like go and rework everything, So it's definitely necessary, I would say.
Wow, that's really neat. Okay, so do you work for a company then or are you like a free I don't know how this works, sorry.
No, yeah, yeah, yeah. I currently work for a tiny design agency in Atlanta. So I would say there's a huge difference too between a UX designer who works at an agency versus someone who works like in-house for like dedicated to a product. Like my experience is probably very different from an in-house UX designer. But yeah, I work for an agency, so I'll like have clients and do whatever they need
Oh, I
basically.
see. I see. So there are other companies that hire your agency to make whatever it is that they need. And then
Right,
you're
right, right.
saying that there's an in-house UX designer would be somebody like for the examples you gave earlier, like someone that works for Facebook or
Right.
okay.
Exactly. They're just dedicated completely to that one product. Um, and yeah, doing that.
Okay, cool. So, Jesse, is this something that you have, I mean, we mentioned before this is a fairly new job market for this,
hmm
but is this something that you had always wanted to do or
No, because like kind of like what you said, I had no idea that this field even existed. And if I had, I don't know, maybe I would have wanted to do this when I was younger, you know? So I mean, I didn't hear about it until like after I graduated college, after I graduated like 1 year later. And then I heard
okay.
about the
So
field.
what did
Yeah.
you study in college then?
I studied management information systems, which
What
is
is
a
that?
mouthful. It is, yeah. It's okay. It's part of the business school. So it is this interesting blend between learning both business skills and management skills, as well as programming skills.
Oh, information
And the
systems,
people
that's
who
what you
come,
said.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
okay.
yeah, yeah, management information systems. And the people who come out of that program tend to be like liaisons between developers and like business people, I guess. Like,
Okay.
so out of college, I was an IT consultant, I guess you could say, for like a year and a half or so.
Okay, so at
Yeah.
what point were you like, was it like a situation where you're like, this is not working for me, or is it because you
hmm
discovered UX?
it was because I was like, this isn't working for me. And
Mhm.
then UX came at the perfect time. So I hated my job. I have like a definitely a creative spirit, and the job that I was in was not creative at all. So I felt super drained every day. And since it was a consulting gig, I had to travel, and so I was away from my friends like constantly. So just all in all, it was a very draining job for me as an individual. And so I was at this point, I was like, I'm willing to do anything else, like literally anything else that's creative. And so when I was looking into the boot camp and the like programs at General Assembly is the boot camp that I went to, that the programs that they offered, that's when I heard what UX design was, and I like did some research and I like looked up what is it, and I honestly like didn't really understand, but I knew that it was more creative than what I was currently doing. So my mindset was basically like, I'm just going to quit my job and go do this boot camp, and even if it's not like the right thing for forever or like for the long term, I know it's like a step in the right direction because at least it's a step in more creative work. So that was, and then on the first day of school, I when I really learned what it was, I was like, oh my god, this is actually perfect. Like I love the way it blends like creative design elements and like aesthetic with like research and human psychology with like interesting business problems. Like it's like just such a combination of a lot of different interests. So I was like, whoa,
Wow,
that's wild.
that's awesome. So how long is the boot camp?
The boot camp I went to was 10 weeks full
10
time,
weeks.
which is pretty damn, sorry, short.
I mean, like, okay, so like you learned everything you needed to know in 10 weeks?
Isn't that wild?
No,
The thing
so
is,
okay, like like for real though, like you really learned everything you needed to know?
honestly, they prepared me well. Like, I mean, if you go to grad school for human computer interactions, that's like a 2 year program or maybe
Right.
four. And then there's definitely longer boot camps, you know, but uh, General Assembly, they got you out in 10 weeks and you learn the basics. And they have like, you do. real life projects. Like I got to work with the Georgia Aquarium, and I did a project with them, and like, so you're kind of like learning by doing it as well. And
Okay.
I feel like that's a really good way to learn quickly. So
Yeah. That's
yeah.
incredible. Okay. So like, okay, I want to ask you about this like transition though. You quit your job
Hmm.
and you were like, I'm gonna do this boot camp. But like, was there some like fear in the fact that maybe you wouldn't like it?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the fact that I wasn't that's why that my mindset was basically like it's a step in the right direction. Even if it's like I won't like it, it'll open a door, I'm sure, to like the next thing that maybe I'll like. And I was just hoping like with one door open, it might lead me to the next door, to the next door, right? So like that was my mindset. I definitely did not know if I would like it or not when I went into it.
So, okay,
But I knew since it was creative,
yes,
it
yes.
was gonna be better.
So, I
Mhm.
am curious okay, so there are people listening probably that have just graduated college, right? And they're in a position where it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, they don't like their job. They found out
Mm,
too late, or maybe they found out too late in their mind, right?
right,
Like, what would you
right,
say to
right.
them? Like, because
Um, yeah.
you were in that position.
Right, and I would say it's not too late, and maybe that's optimistic, and maybe, like, UX design is a field where you can easily transition to versus, like, it would be hard to transition to, like, become a doctor because it takes, like, so many years of school, right? Like, that is maybe I don't know. But, like, I have found that even though if I could do things differently, I would have majored in something different, like something that I actually enjoyed. But I know that the things that I learned from my major has helped inform my successes in my current job. And honestly, that's the way like a lot of people feel in UX, or it's like, oh, I used to be a social worker, but I learned how to like a lot about like human psychology and like a lot about like empathy that has helped me become a UX designer. Or like I used to be a photographer. There's just like so many people from so many different fields that have found their way into UX design, and it just makes you realize like every part of your path is like a necessary step to get you to wherever the next part is. So it's like not a waste. But I also would say it's not too late because there's so many ways you can learn online and like take classes and gain new skills. I'm a huge believer in like we're super moldable and we can learn new things like constantly. So you are not a fixed person when you graduate college. There is still so much life to go. So, yeah.
Yes, I love all of that you just said. I agree completely with all of it, and I just find it so inspiring because it's like it takes a lot. I'm gonna be honest. I'm just gonna be real right now. Like I think even in the Asian American community too, like there's this like
Hmm.
idea of like you have to have your life set, and there.
Absolutely. From like age 5.
Right. And so like I think it's just really cool that made this proactive decision like, hey, you know what? I don't like what I'm doing. And so I'm just going to find something
Hmm.
else and do something about it. So I really
Absolutely.
love that. Um Jesse,
Yeah.
if we could get back to a little bit of your actual job. I loved hearing your journey a little bit.
Hmm.
Um but with UX, are there what is it that you like about it? I mean, you kind of explained some of it, but um
Yeah. Um, I like okay, so like after we've done the research, after we've like kind of brainstormed ideas and we have like the first like mock-up or whatever, I really like bringing it back to the users and having them give us feedback because then that feels like something is actually starting to be created. And I like it's also so gratifying when they're like, "Oh my god, like this solved a problem that like I had." Like if this was like in development, like this would change my life. And that's like super super validating, but there's oftentimes when it's like, "Oh, no, this is actually really useless." Like, but that's also, like, just, like, being a UX designer, you are just primed to, like, get any sort of feedback and know that, like, there's no such thing as failure because, like, any feedback is going to help make the product better, even if it means that you did a bad job, but at least the next iteration is gonna be better, right? So, like, that I don't know, it's a very, like, kind of soft answer, but I like process of testing your ideas with the users and, like, iterating off of that.
So what is like the thought process for you? Say like, okay, so you're presented with the problem or you're
Mhm.
asked to do something, and then where does like how does the project start?
Mm. So the project starts with, like, a research plan. S and I think I kinda got into this where it's like you make a plan, like, for my personal job, my personal current project, we made a plan of, like, okay, we're gonna interview, like, 10 to 15 different nurse managers from, like, these different locations with these different, like, experiences. We're gonna ask these questions to them, and I guess that, like, kicks off the project is, like, the research
Okay,
plan,
then after
if
you
that
get
if
the
that makes sense.
research, right? Like, and then you have to come up
Mhm,
with the experience, then like what are
mhm,
some of the actionable things that you have to go through?
mm. Yeah, okay, so this is hmm, so my current project, it's, like, way more high level, I would say, than, like, a typical UX project. Like, your typical UX project, you're like, "I'm designing, like, a new screen," like, on a social platform like Facebook or something like that. Or someone's like, "Hey, can you design, like, like, product or the checkout flow, like, in Shopify," or something like that. So it's very, like, focused, but my current project is super broad. Some would even call it like service design, which is a whole nother field where you're designing something wider, the entire experience beyond just one digital product. You're designing like multiple different digital touch points that one person might come across. So I just want to make that distinction.
Okay, yes.
um, so, I know it's a lot. It's kind of confusing.
No, I love it.
uh,
It's great. Keep going, please. I want to know everything.
Okay. So I guess your question was, after once we get into the concepting, like what that looks like. So for me, basically, I'll kind of organize what all the pain points are, that we heard from the nurse managers. Like, what are the patterns that we're hearing? So, for instance, like they have to go to 20 different systems in one day just to like get all the information they need, and that's like a very inefficient process for them. So then I'll start brainstorming like what are different ways we can solve that. Like maybe it's a dashboard that aggregates a lot of the information. So it's like, okay, now I have this idea, it's a dashboard. And then I'll basically like get in my notebook or my sketchbook and then start like just drawing out different like features or like screens, just like hypothetical, like the sky's the limit, like what could solve it. And I'll just sort of like sketch all the screens. And then there's a lot of like feedback that comes into play. Like you ask your teammates, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And then the few winners that come out, you start mocking them up like on software, like on your computer. So like I use a tool called Figma. Um, it's similar to Sketch. There's or like Adobe XD, but it's basically this like wireframing prototyping tool where that is meant for UX designers to design out screens. So I'll just get in that tool and I'll start like designing that. Um, and then that's when all the like feedback and iteration comes and we'll like test with users and like all of that after that.
Okay, yeah, that answered my question perfectly. I think I was just curious to how, you even get an interface started, like I think for me, like my brain just doesn't work like that, but the wording that you used was, sky's the limit as you're brainstorming.
Hmm.
And I think for some
Right.
people that is really challenging. So have you kind of always been that kind of person, just always kind of thinking big picture and like dreaming and able to see things like
Mm,
creatively like that? Is that kind of in your DNA to do things like that?
I I think so, but I also don't think something really cool about UX design is that there is structure to the brainstorming. Like, yes, the sky's the limit, but you're also there's one specific challenge that you're trying to solve. And like you have heard feedback from users about how like A, B, and C is inefficient. So you like you have like a prompt in your head already. So you're and there's so many like examples that have come before you. Other people have solved this problem before. You're not the first one. So like you can do more research and there's like this whole thing where you do like competitive comparative analysis where you just kind of like look at all the products that are out in the market. And so there's just so much material that'll help make the sky the limit less intimidating, I guess I could say. Like you're not creating something out of nothing. You have so much research and so much like other examples to help get you going. So
Yeah, okay. Sounds
yeah.
less intimidating. But
Yeah, like for instance, like if I was designing like a checkout flow, like when you like put something in your cart and then you check out, like that there's like so much that goes to it, but also we know what kind of works because we've seen it, like in Amazon, we've seen it. So like there's just so much like that gets reused as well. So
man, I love this. This is so great. I'm learning so much right now. This is awesome. Um, so what are some things that maybe you don't like about your job? Or some
so I think
challenges?
right. Well, I would say that what I don't like about my like mm, 'cause to be a UX designer, you also have to be a good communicator.
Mhm.
It's important because you're trying to explain your concepts to your users as well as to your developers, like that kind of thing. But like I being in an agency, there's another layer of like you have to like be able to present the ideas to the client and like kind of tie it all up and explain like everything almost like in a salesy way. And that's like what I don't like is like having to like mm, yeah, like focus so much on communicating and like persuading a client as opposed to just like working on the product, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So you
Yeah,
actually have
that's
to
like
like
specific to
pitch your
agency life.
ideas to them?
Um, yeah, I mean they have since they're they're the ones paying you, I guess, to do the work. So in a sense, like they have to be on board with whatever you come up with. And you know, like if you have a good client, it's a collaborative process, but sometimes it's not. So
Right. Right. Sure, I can imagine.
yeah.
I can only imagine, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah,
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 I
yeah,
mean
yeah.
like that would be really
Yeah.
challenging to especially if you like work on something and then they're just like it sucks. I hate it. I think
Yeah. Well, especially if it's this is frustrating when it's like you feel like you've done research and you've gotten feedback from users and you feel like you've created something that's on the but then like your client has this like one track mindset of like, but I want to put this, this, and this in the product. And you're like, but you're not the user. So you don't like really get to have that say, but you can't say that to your client because they're the ones that are paying you. So
right.
it's tricky.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I'm sure. Man. Um so how long have you been doing this then?
um 3.5 years.
Oh wow. So right out of the boot camp, was it easy for you to find a job?
Yeah, it was. I was really lucky though. After the boot camp, they do this thing. It's kind of like a reverse career fair where all the students have their own booth and they have all their projects up, and then they'll invite recruiters to come in and take a look at everyone's work. So at that showcase, a recruiter came from my previous company and then hired me out of there. So I was really lucky.
Wow, that's awesome. Um,
Yeah.
what you mentioned the name General Assembly. Is so that what is that? I don't even know what that is.
That's the yeah, yeah, that's the boot camp, and they have them all over the US in different cities, but it is basically it's like they offer a lot of like classes and workshops, like full-time classes, part-time classes, half day workshops. That's just about like any sort of digital thing. So there's like a boot camp for UX, which I went to, or there's like data science boot camps or like coding boot camps. And it's all about helping people to like gain new skills or change their careers or enhance their careers in the digital space.
Oh wow, that's awesome. Man, but yeah,
Yeah.
you already talked about it, but seriously, there are just so many ways to educate yourself these days, through online. I think virtually even now, even more so now that we're in this
Hmm.
pandemic and I think it's just so cool. Um
Yeah.
Jesse, was there anything else that you wanted to mention or talk about or about UX
Um,
that I
I
maybe
don't
missed?
I don't think so. I have personally loved it's like definitely a mindset shift being a UX designer because like what I mentioned before about how like you have to be okay with failing is like part of the job, which was hard to sort of like change my mindset to that. It's like there's something called like growth mindset versus fixed mindset as well, and that's something I think like UX designers are more you have to practice like a growth mindset, which basically means like every failure is a way to improve essentially. Um, so yeah, I mean that's something I love about UX.
As you were talking, I was like, oh man, I should just change my mindset for life because I I have this like perfection. I was just talking to my husband about this. I have this like perfectionist like
Yes,
obsession and and like I just want to
absolutely.
yeah, I just want to be good at everything and like and I don't like I don't like
Right.
trying yeah, I don't like trying new things because like what if I fail? But
Yeah,
what you're saying makes so much sense and it's like I there's just a lot of wisdom in it and I feel like even in my own life I need to change my attitude. Like yeah, that's so true. Well, if you fail, you just learn from it and it's really just growing in your life, whether
exactly.
it's UX or just anything. So,
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It changes everything. You should definitely look into growth mindset versus fixed mindset because like fixed mindset is basically like you think that you are you have these innate qualities like innate intelligence or talents or gifts, and you kind of like function based off of that. So you're like, oh, I'm not a math person, therefore I will never be a math person. And like people who have that kind of mindset are less likely to try new things because they're thinking to themselves, I don't want to fail, I don't want to like be seen as someone who just isn't good at it, versus someone who has a growth mindset is just like, no, you can be good at anything as long as you put the effort into it. And failing is part of that process of like growing. And people who have a growth mindset tend to actually be better at things because they're willing to just put in the effort and keep trying, and they're not discouraged when they don't do well. And I think like I think it changes everything to have
no,
a
yes.
growth
I'm like
mindset.
having my own revelation right now. I'm like, "Oh my goodness." Like I thought I was like had a growth mindset, but I think I don't. Like I'm so
Yeah,
like that. I'm like, "No, I'm not good at it. I'm not going to try." But like but why? I've
exactly.
never tried, right? Like
Yeah, yeah. I had the same revelation. I was like, oh my God, I've been functioning with a fixed mindset my entire life.
yeah. Oh man, that's okay.
Yeah.
If you take anything from this growth mindset and be a UX
Yes.
designer,
Yes.
that's
Amazing.
awesome. That's awesome. Well, before we end our time together, Jesse, is there any advice that you could give to somebody that maybe is thinking about going into UX? I feel like you've already given a lot of sound advice, but anything at all, like uh yeah, just any advice that you'd give them, anything that maybe you'd wanted to have known before you started this journey.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I would say, I guess like there's this thing in UX design where we say that like the most important quality is empathy. And it's true because like in order to like create a solution, you have to be able to empathize with where the pain point or where the problem is that someone is facing. And you have to be able to like listen, and you have to be able to like take yourself. It's easy to get into the mindset of like, I'm the designer, so I hold all of the answers in my hands and I'm creating the experience. When in reality, it's more like the people you talk to are the ones that are defining the experience because they're the ones that are using it.
Mm.
So I guess like that being said, I feel like maybe that's why like it's so easy to transition to UX design like from a 10-week program, because a lot of the skills that are most important in the field are super soft. Like you just have to be an empathetic person. And that, not to say that's easy, that's very hard, but it's also not something you can just pick up like in a 10-week boot camp. Like it's not like a hard skill like that. So I guess that's, I don't know. If you are an empathetic person, then you probably have what it takes to be a UX designer.
Wow, I that's great. That's really awesome advice. I My mind didn't even go there, but yeah, that makes perfect sense. In order to relate to the client itself and find the solutions that they need, you have to be understanding and willing to like get in the hole with them,
Right, right, right,
you
right.
know?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
awesome. Well, Jessie, thank you so much for your time today. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode and you have any questions about UX design, I'm sure I can connect you with Jessie or somebody
Mm.
else, or most likely Jessie, because I don't know any other UX designers. But and I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you. Um, Please feel free to DM us, or you can email us at podcastwigu, WIGU, at gmail.com. Thanks so much again, Jessie, for your time today.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome on anytime. Part 2 if you want.
Yeah. Part two.
All right, guys. Thanks. Until next time. Bye.